Now, the story goes on to say as they ran off the field, they had to run right in front of the other team's bench and fans, and Ken Leonard, Coach Leonard, was shaking his fist, and he was on. They're like pelting them with stuff on that sideline. And said even one of the bishops on the sideline was giving Ken heck as he went off the field. And
well, welcome to the table. Mike Chamness joins us today, the author of the recently released book Victorious, a story of faith, family, and football in the heartland, about Ken and Derek Leonard. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me,
Yeah,
Chris
thank
and
you.
Brad.
You
Appreciate
bet.
it.
Yeah, great to have you. We think awfully highly of Ken and Derek, and as you know, had them on not too long ago, and we were excited when they told us about this book, so we're glad you did it. Now, would you share a little bit about your story? One of the things we've learned doing this podcast is people love other people's stories, and I know you've spent a lot of time in working in state government and Illinois Emergency Management Association, but prior to that, you spent a lot of time in sports journalism, and we'd just love to have you share your story with our listeners.
Be glad to. Yeah, I grew up thinking that somebody's going to pay me to play baseball or basketball or something else.
We all did.
We all had that. Yeah.
See what size I am, and that didn't. My genetics didn't work out. Actually, my grandfather, one of my grandfathers, I was born in Cairo. He owned a truck line in Cairo. He also owned a Brooklyn Dodgers minor league Class D minor league baseball team.
Oh, wow.
In Cairo for 2 or 3 years, and the Cardinals actually did spring training there during World War II because of travel restrictions to save
No
resources.
kidding.
Oh,
How about
interesting. Huh.
So they took a trip to Southern California and never came back in the early 50s. They stayed out there. So I kind of, and my other grandfather actually took care of the diamond for that minor league team, and he started taking me to games when I was, Cardinal games when I was 5 years old or so. So I kind of had that in my blood, but I wasn't good enough. No one's going to pay me to do that. The next best thing, I could get paid a little to cover those games, and I had great opportunities there. I became sports editor of the Southern Illinoisan for several years, the regional paper in Carbondale. I started out covering high school sports and then SIU basketball, baseball, and football down there during some great years.
And
there.
I was going to say, what time frame was that?
So I was there from about 1975 until I came here in 1986.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
Gotcha.
they had
Did the Salukis ever, win? What conference are they in? The
Missouri
Missouri
Valley?
They did. They in football they won a national championship in 1983 under a coach named Ray Dempsey.
Oh yeah. Yep.
They won that national championship. Itchy Jones' teams finished second in the country once and qualified for postseason almost every year before he went to Illinois to become head baseball coach there. Their basketball was a little up and down, but when they hired Rich Herron, it started to come up again.
She had some good teams that you covered.
Did.
Yeah.
And then somebody talked me into becoming news editor of the Southern Illinoisan.
Okay.
And I did that for 2 years. They said, this is a promotion, and you'll be on a track to become a general managing editor, publisher, whatever. I really didn't like it. And I could tell you very succinctly, when you cover sports, almost always you're talking about people's accomplishments.
Right.
When you cover news, every day you talk about people's failures.
Yeah,
That's all you
If it bleeds, it reads. Isn't that what they say?
That's what you cover. And I wasn't real happy doing that.
Yeah.
And I got a phone call one day from a guy named Paul Povsey, who was an editor at the State Journal-Register and had become a friend of mine because he followed SIU sports and he was reading what I was writing. And they were looking for an assistant sports editor, and he asked me if I'd be interested. And the timing was perfect for me and my career, so I did. And Larry Harnley hired me as assistant sports editor. And then when Larry retired, I became sports editor of the State Journal-Register. Going into state government, so I was sports editor there from about 87 to 91. And then I was approached and asked if I wanted to become Director of Communications for the Office of the Secretary of State. A guy named Mike Murphy had been the political columnist at the State Journal Register. He'd become the press secretary for George Ryan, who got elected Secretary of State. And the first couple of times I said, no, I really like what I'm doing. But I had two daughters, Angie and Cindy, and they were junior high age. I was missing all of their stuff, covering other people's kids' stuff.
You're
they
right.
were involved in music and track, and Cindy in basketball, and so it was.
Yeah.
I thought it might be more like a 9-to-5 job. It actually was more like a 9-to-9 job.
Sure.
Yeah. Including weekends.
Yeah.
Right?
But I did have the ability to watch my daughters do the things that they like to do and that I wanted to see, and I had to be. The first time I ever met George Ryan, well, the second time, he offered me the job. The first time I said no, then I got called back and he asked me again if I did. And I said, well, I have to tell you something. I said, I really don't think I voted for you.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't care.
Yeah. Is that right? Yeah.
So I did that. I became appointed director of the Illinois Emergency Management Agency later, and simultaneously, before 9/11, was asked to become chairman of the Illinois Terrorism Task Force. So I did that the last 15 or 16 years of my time
Gotcha.
at IEMA, and that was before 9/11 because of the bombing in Oklahoma City and domestic terrorism at the time. And then, of course, it changed into what happened after 9/11.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, very.
Because we were talking about that before we got on the podcast, and I didn't even realize how it was organized and how many things that you have to prepare for, and the different facets of all the things that go into, preparing for something that happens like the Oklahoma City bombing or a plane crash or a train accident.
So there are really two sides to both emergency management, which would be primarily the natural hazards and the homeland security piece, the man-made threats and attacks. One side of that is certainly the response to what happens. The other side of that is the prevention side. What can you do to prevent it from happening? Some things you can't prevent from happening, so how do you respond?
Sure.
But embedded in all of that is the training component, the preparation for if this happens, how are you going to respond? Much like what you guys do in this very building we're in now, is you train your people to respond to flooding and accidents that occur in the home. On a larger scale, that's what happens at the Illinois Emergency Management Agency and at FEMA, and should be happening everywhere.
Right.
So I would tell you that I believe Illinois is one of the most prepared states.
Is that right? Yeah.
There is. I do.
great.
A lot of resources are invested, a lot of time's invested, and every governor that I worked for, and I have 4 or 5 of them on both sides of the aisle, not a single one of them cut our budgets or said, no, we're going to do less of this. They all came to understand how important it was to respond to those disasters, to prevent them if you can, or to respond to them. Because, I mean, from a self-interest standpoint for a governor, nothing can end your career much quicker than if you fail to respond to a disaster in the proper way.
Oh, yeah. We were talking to Misty Busher, and I think the head of IEMA called her when we had that the high winds. I forget what they called that, but a lot of devastation around. And he was like, well, who's the head of the disaster response team for the city of Springfield? And she goes, I just appointed myself that person because they didn't have one. But I think IEMA really helped her walk through, how to clean things up.
And that's the job. The job at the state level at IEMA is not to come and take over. The job is to come in and support the
Be
local.
a resource and support
Be a resource
for the local.
and support the local authorities. Because here's the deal that we understood. We go in to respond to a disaster. We go back home at some point.
Yeah.
The other people live there and stay there. So they're always the ones in charge unless they ask us.
Sure.
Would you please take this over and do this and this and this? Otherwise, the job of the state or of the federal government is to come in and support and complement what what they're attempting to do.
It makes a lot of
Provide
sense.
resources.
Those are the folks who are going to be here in the community ongoing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Makes a lot
we've
of
done
sense.
some cleaning at the IEMA buildings,
Yeah.
and it's amazing the resources that we have
It
that nobody
is.
would
yeah.
know. Nobody would know about.
It's really actually, I told people after I retired, the best job in state government, honestly, is being IEMA director, because nobody. It's kind of like being an umpire. Unless you screw up, nobody knows your name.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But you have the ability to go in and really help people and communities
Sure.
at a
Yeah,
time
and make
when-
a difference.
at the worst times
Yes.
Yep. Sure.
of their lives.
That's right.
In
Absolutely.
many cases.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one thing, I heard a couple people say, and we kind of corrected this. They said, "This is the worst." I'm sorry. This is not the worst I've ever seen. I've seen worse than this. I've done this 50. I said, "Yeah, but it's the worst ever for these
For them,
people."
that's
It's
Yeah,
their
well, they're in
first
the
time.
middle of it. It is the worst thing
It
ever.
may be their first time. It's
Yeah.
their only time.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that. So
I know,
And
I'm with
people hammer on state employees. Some I will tell you, and
Yeah.
I had departments that ranged from 50 people to 1,500 people.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you that in my experience, which covers more than 20 years,
Sure.
a very high percentage in the high 90s, people, regardless of their job, come to work
Yeah.
wanting to do the best job they can and trying to do the best job they can. If you give them the proper training and resources and get out of their way, they'll do. You only read about the ones who screw up, but you
Sure.
don't read about the 98%, 99% that do their job
Yeah.
every day.
So I want to obviously want to talk about the book, but one last question because I'm fascinated by the IEMA deal. The big accident we had on 55 South during the dust storm, would IEMA have been involved in that?
They would have been, and they were involved in that, in responding again to support local authorities, and mainly, of course, it would be the aftermath of that.
Right.
Okay.
You know, what kind of support is there anybody left there that their vehicle can't be used? They don't have any housing, for example.
Okay.
Let's put them up in a hotel. Until the Red Cross
Gotcha.
steps in. So
Okay.
it's that type of layered response, and then the aftermath of what got destroyed that needs replaced, that the state or the federal government might be able to help replace in terms of guardrails or highways or
Yeah, gotcha.
whatever. It's those types of things that IEMA is able to come in and do, and FEMA, then
Comes
on the back of
on top
IEMA.
of that. Yeah, gotcha.
if it reaches that sort of level.
Yeah,
Right.
interesting.
Right.
Good deal.
So why the book? Change of topics here. Obviously, your love of sports, and you spent years covering sports. What made you want to do this?
Yeah, I do love sports, and honestly, Chris, I don't know what made me do it. It was a nagging thought that started around 2020, the COVID year. And Ken Leonard I knew Ken was getting close to announcing his retirement. He was going to retire as the winningest high school football coach in state history. I live in Rochester. I already knew the 8 championships in 10 years,
Right.
unprecedented for a public school in the state of Illinois. I thought, man, this is especially with Ken retiring, this is a football story that should be told.
Right.
And I kind of wanted the opportunity to do that. And so at a junior football league game that they both were at, I just approached them at one point and said, would you guys consider? And they were like, well, we'll think about that. It started out to be a football book. It ended up being a book more about people, more about their faith and family journey. Because as I got into it, that was the more compelling story. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of football in the book. And even there, I wanted to try and find some things behind the scenes. Like, there was this big play. What led to that big play? In one part of the book, a Sacred Heart Griffin Championship win, there's a play just before halftime that's a critical play. They ended up beating one of the number 1 ranked team in the state at the time, and they were heavy underdogs. And I found out that not only do the players study, or the coaches study game filmed in preparation, the players do. One of the smarter players at Sacred Heart Griffin on the defense noticed that if their quarterback lined up with his feet parallel, it was always a running play. But if the right foot was just a little bit behind the left foot, it was always a pass play.
Wow.
And he saw him line up,
Decided
and they called a
advantage, yeah.
blitz,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
they sacked the quarterback.
Yep.
And because they were inside the 10-yard line when this occurred, and the clock runs out, they don't score.
Oh, wow.
Sacred Heart Griffin has all the momentum.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, the story goes on to say as they ran off the field, they had to run right in front of the other team's bench and fans. And Ken Leonard, Coach Leonard, was shaking his fist, and he was on. They're like pelting them with stuff on that sideline. And said even one of the bishops on the sideline was giving Ken heck as he went off the field. But little things like that in a Rochester championship game that they won, there was a play where Derek called one play. Well, the quarterback holds his forefinger and thumb up to the letter J. Hank Beatty is in the slot. Hank Beatty does the J. They changed the play. He saw that Hank Beatty had one-on-one coverage Hank's sophomore year, and nobody could cover Hank.
Sure.
They changed the play and throw a 20-yard touchdown pass. Well, Derek doesn't see what they've called. Assistant coach comes up and taps him on the shoulder. They're changing the play. What?
Right.
And Derek says, I don't know what they call, but they seem confident, so I'm going to let them go.
Yeah.
And, of course, the letter J, I find out from Hank Beatty, was the play was called Jenny. It was the name of the quarterback's girlfriend. He named some of the plays after the girlfriends of the quarterbacks. And so, I mean, Derek's relationship building and how he connects with teenage young men is really kind of special. Ken, too, in two different ways, but very special. But behind the scenes stuff like that, Christian Gripper, who fumbled the ball that cost Sacred Heart or Griffin a huge upset championship win, the only fumble he ever had. But there's a chapter about that, talking about that and how he overcame that, and now he's back at Rochester as an assistant on Derek's
is that right? Yeah.
Kind of comes full circle, and he had lived with Ken and Liz Leonard some after Philip, their adopted son, got killed in a car crash.
Right.
He was best friends with Philip. So those things are what I think make the book special.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly nothing I did to write. Their story is just fascinating.
Yeah, it gives you a peek behind the curtain at
It
really
does,
who they are and what drives them and what makes them the kind of people they are.
Exactly. And people look at successful people and think they don't have any problems.
Right.
Amen.
Yeah. Right. That's right.
You do.
Yeah, you do. That's right.
It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. You go through
Yeah.
same life things that everybody goes through.
Absolutely.
It's how you handle it.
Yeah.
I have twin grandsons in 6th grade, play Rochester JFL, Cale and Liam.
Yeah.
I asked them, I said, what's the most important play in a football game? And they're saying, well, I said, no, it's the next play.
Right.
It's always the next play.
Sure.
Same in that Ken and Derek have shown in life. It's this happened. Now what are you going to do next?
Yeah, what are we going to do with this?
What are you going to do next?
Yeah.
That is so true. Well, and you know, my son Matt played for Derek for his senior year, and he went on to go to college at Central Missouri, and Derek and his staff were able to get him a preferred walk-on deal, and when nobody else was really looking at him because he's undersized. But he went through some tough times trying to figure things out and transferred. Left, quit playing football, but made, some dark times for him. And Derek had, no problem coming over to the condo and sitting with Matt and talking through things with him. And, and like I said, we had only known him for a year and a half, but I experienced it firsthand for sure. There's a lot of depth there with him, way more than football, X's and O's, no question about it.
Absolutely. I came to the conclusion what makes Ken and Derek both special is that relationship building and how they treat people.
Yep.
And they're both
Absolutely.
they're different.
Yeah,
They're different, but they both had those deep connections that I think makes kids want to play for them and also want to do their best for them.
Agreed.
So I think they're both special people, and they touch the lives of I'm not great at math, but
Yeah, do the numbers.
Do the numbers. It's in excess of
Staggering.
4,000 young men.
I bet.
Yeah.
And Derek has told me some of the key players on his championship teams were kids that rarely got on the field.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I mean,
But
I
help
loved,
them accomplish as a team. Yeah.
and he pays attention to those kids.
Yep.
Friday night against Eisenhower, they had a big lead. I'm keeping stats for the radio station and trying to keep up, and I noticed, number 75 or 77 young, an offensive lineman's in the backfield. They have the ball at the 2-yard line.
Oh, that's awesome.
Hands the ball off to the offensive lineman. He scores a touchdown.
Oh, that's cool. I love it.
His name was Young, and it was senior night.
Sure.
Kid's a senior.
Yep. That's cool.
Got that chance.
Yeah,
That's cool.
While different, like you said, different in their approaches, I think they both live by a certain set of core values that drives what they do. I think you mentioned you saw the podcast we did with Ken and Derek, and to your point about relationships, when we asked them about what it's taken for them, what did they see as kind of the secret sauce to creating the kinds of ongoing success at their programs that they've done, and for both of them, it all came back to relationships. Those young men and their families, and the way that they engage their families in the process, and the impact they have really more on them as young men, and eventually one day, hopefully, as husbands and fathers, is just as or more important to Ken and Derek than the X's and O's.
And they also infuse those kids, not in an onerous way, but with their faith too. Living their faith, even in a public school.
Yeah.
Derek's able to do that. And one of the most interesting stories in 2017, Rochester, Nick Baker was the quarterback. Rochester had what Jim Rupert at one point wondered is that's the best team they ever had. They went the entire regular season without committing a turnover, their starters.
Yeah.
They had 2 in the playoffs on the way to a state championship. And talking to some of the players, they said, so that also was the year that Liz Leonard died, Derek's mother.
Right.
These guys, Derek never talked about it. They knew. When I talked to the players, they said, yeah, we really wanted to focus. We wanted to make this special. It's all we could do to help.
Yeah.
So, to get teenage kids to respond that way, even to get them to notice what's going on, because it's not being talked about. Derek never said, hey, this is what's going on. Just really special. And you talked about your son's experience.
Yeah.
I have in the book, Peyton Webster played for Springfield High School. Ken Leonard helped him get a scholarship to play football. He was on the other team.
Wow. That's cool.
Nick Baker got one Division I football offer because Derek hounded
I know it.
Nick Hill, the SIU coach, and Nick Hill came up and saw Nick Baker. He signed Nick Baker. Now Nick Baker, at this point, already holds the SIU school record for completions.
Yeah.
He's 300 and some odd yards with 8 regular season games left for holding the school record for yardage, passing yardage. And he's 10 touchdowns away with 8 games left from owning that. He will own every
all the
record
records
in SIU's record book, and that's the only Division I school that offered him a chance to play football.
I was going to say, before you went through those stats, I was saying, and it looks like he's turned out okay down at Southern.
Turned out he was
he's unbelievable competitor.
Oh.
Great. He's a great quarterback, but he's a better football player.
And in the book,
and
that's
better
what,
young man.
That's what Nick Hill talks about. Nick Hill says he's a kid that would rather throw for 150 yards and no touchdowns than we win.
Yeah.
He said there was a game where Nick Baker threw for 450 some odd yards and 4 touchdowns, and they lost. And he said, I looked in the back of the room after the game, and Baker's back there with tears in his eyes. Nick Hill said, guys, that's what a winner looks like.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So
he was Matt's quarterback. He's unbelievable.
Oh, he's
the guy. He reminded me of Brett Favre. He could throw a ball 60 yards on his rope. I mean, I saw him throw some balls in these 7-on-7 camps over the summer. Like, okay, this kid's special.
The day that Nick Hill and one of his assistants came up to see Nick Baker, was the week leading up to the state championship game, his senior year, and it was rainy and cold and windy. And the assistant coach went back to the pickup truck. He got cold. Nick Hill watched Baker throw the ball in those conditions and went home and called him that night and offered him.
Yeah.
Yeah, if he were 6'3", he'd have had an offer from every
D1
Division I school in the country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, he dissected Northwestern last year when Southern beat them. He did the same to Northern Illinois
Yes. Yeah.
this year.
And he is a winner, man.
And that's it. The
he's
chapter
a
about Nick
competitor
Baker
and winner.
is called the
Yep.
It factor.
Okay, good, yeah.
What is it? How do you describe it? And all the coaches,
Yeah.
Nick Hill says it. Derek says he's got the it. And the it is you're a winner.
Yes.
And he certainly has been. And for his height, and the chapter there starts with a paragraph where Mike Reese, the longtime just retired Saluki broadcaster down there, was telling me the story that happened last year after one of their public scrimmages. A little girl, like third grader, came up and looked up and said to Baker, "Man, you're so tall." And Baker's like, thank you. I've never heard that. But man, he plays tall.
Oh, he sure does.
Yeah, he does.
Amen.
For
That's
sure.
For sure.
So,
Yeah.
what were your one or two biggest surprises? Things in writing the book about Ken or Derek or their family or the programs. Things that you were like, "Whoa, I had no idea."
Well, one thing I had no idea, and neither did Derek, was that his mother, Liz Leonard, suffered from agoraphobia most of her life, which is, for some people, paralyzing fear of leaving home or a safe place. And Ken knew all about it. The first time Ken heard anything about it was when he was working in Alaska when he was in college, the Alaskan pipeline, and called and she talked about having a panic attack going into a classroom at Illinois State University. And Bradley knew about it because Bradley tells a story that when he was 12 years old, she was driving him to the mall and she couldn't drive any longer. And at 12 years old, Bradley drove the car back home. Derek said the biggest compliment I can give my mom is, I don't know what the word means. I never heard it. She never complained about it. And she didn't. I said to, and this is in the book, I said to Ken, because I've kind of developed a fear of heights, I said, that's like telling me that I have to climb up the side of a mountain. And Ken said, no, it's like telling you have to live on the side of the mountain.
Ooh,
Right.
Yeah, wow.
And she felt safe in her home. For 25 years, she had a teaching degree, but she remained a teacher's aide that whole time.
Okay.
And some of her family believes that's because she liked working with the kids, but didn't want to be that out front person with the parents and others. And so, her overcoming that and doing all the things that she did was remarkable to me, because if Ken was the face of Sacred Heart Griffin, Mr. SHG, as he was called when he retired, that made her the first lady, meaning that she had some public roles she had to fulfill that she was not necessarily really comfortable with.
Yeah.
And, I mean, one of the stories that Lindsay Leonard, Derek's wife, told me that she learned from Liz is how to deal with the fans. Fans short for fanatic, and man, and I can be that way too.
Sure.
But Liz would most often Lindsay said, would come late to the games a lot and try to sit in areas just kind of up. She's with a friend one night, and there's a couple guys sitting below Liz, and they're giving Ken all sorts of heck about some plays he called or whatever. Now, the winningest football coach in state history.
Right.
They're ragging on
And everybody knows more than he
Yeah,
does.
of course. Yeah.
And the friend turns to Liz and says, what are you going to do about that? And she said, nothing. God will take care of it. The end of the story is the game ends. Ken does his post-game stuff. Now he climbs up the bleachers. These guys are still there and sits down next to Liz. Guys are mortified. They had no idea they were mouthing off in front of the coach's wife.
Sure.
Right.
And she said, see, God took care of it.
I love it.
And
Make them think twice before they do that about somebody else.
And Lindsay said she's experienced the same thing, and she learned that lesson from Liz.
Yeah.
Even at Rochester, people, why did you do this? And she says,
that was the dumbest play call, and most successful football coach ever at Rochester.
Right.
Oh, too funny.
Yeah, they both, Ken and Liz. I will say, I had a younger brother who played for Ken, and my dad passed away when my younger brother Doug was a junior in high school, and Ken and Liz like took care of him. My mom was here, obviously, still at that time, but I mean, he was like a father figure to him in a lot of ways. And to your point, you would have never known that about Liz.
Yeah.
Especially in the public roles that she
Yeah.
played, and she played a lot of those.
Well, and I have to commend Ken and Derek. My deal with them is I'm going to write the book, but you guys have final veto
Yeah, sure.
over. If you don't want it in the book, it's not there. And initially, Ken tells me this, and he says, but that's not for the book. And I didn't say anything then. I said, my decision was, you know what? I'm going to write this, share it with them, and then we'll talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I said was, you know, there are a lot of people out there who suffer from that or something like
else.
that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the story is Liz got help later in life, and it made it
Sure.
tolerable and better. And so they readily agreed that, yeah, if it
Keep
can
it
help
in.
people, we will. And I think it even enhances what Liz was able to accomplish because she overcame that obstacle and
Yep.
and did what she had to do and did it well and touched the lives of a lot of people.
Yeah. So this is your first book you've written and published, or have you written other books?
I'm going to say yes. So after I graduated from Murfreesboro High School, and I was on the basketball team there, but 2 years behind me was a sophomore class that had a couple of all-state players in it. And they ended up after I graduated, and it's probably the reason why, they ended up for a 3 or 4 year period having the best period of basketball in Murfreesboro High School history. Made the Sweet 16 1 year, lost to Collinsville by a point or two. And I ended up writing a little booklet called, when I was in college, called The Golden Era. And I read it now and I'm embarrassed. I could have done so much better. I wish I had. But people there liked it. It was just a community little booklet. And I'm sure I'll have the same reaction here. I'll take a look at this and say, man, I wish I'd have done something better.
Yeah, once it gets published, right, you're like, oh,
Hey,
I
once
wish
it's there, it's
yeah,
there.
it's
There's
there.
not much you can do about it. They, the one thing I say in the acknowledgments, I call it acknowledgments, apologies, and a preface because there are people, even people I interviewed, whose name doesn't appear in the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's so many great players and characters and people. 39 years with Ken and Derek, 18 years, and Ken 4 years before that at Gridley. You know, I just have to apologize to those people. The book would have been that thick,
Right.
and nobody would have read it. But there are so many names of people that should be in there. But what I do say is everybody I talk to helped me develop the context for
Yeah.
the book
Oh,
to
I'm sure.
understand where things ought to go and what I ought to look into. But I just couldn't get everybody's name in there. And that wasn't the goal of a book like this. Everybody knows the football history. They may not know the backstories, but they know that football history. Sacred Heart Griffin has a wonderful website that has all the records and stuff on it. And we're developing that for our book website for Rochester and Sacred Heart Griffin.
Cool.
To put on the website because while Ken's career is over, Derek's career is still going.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, I close one chapter here saying, if you look across the landscape in Illinois, there may only be one person based on age and number of wins that has any chance to break Ken Leonard's record, and that's his son, Derek.
That's
Right.
Derek,
Man, it's remarkable that a coach would last 39 years.
Sure.
Either voluntarily or involuntarily.
Right.
Because you not only deal with coaching football, you deal with helicopter parents who think their kid's the next Tom Brady.
Yep.
You deal with school boards that I've seen school IASA when I worked there. I saw school board elections change based on 4 people wanting to fire a coach and getting elected. What they ran on was, we need to fire this coach.
Right. It's crazy.
Amazing.
And so to last that long and touch that number of lives is special, regardless of the victories.
Yep.
In fact, some of the best lessons learned as I talked to players were from losses,
Right.
not the victories.
Not the victory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you deal with this loss, with this mistake? And like I said, what are you going to do next? That's really how
Right.
you deal
Yeah,
with
great
it.
life lessons, right?
Yeah.
There are great
it's the
life
way life
lessons.
goes,
Yeah.
right
It
there.
is.
For sure.
It's,
Yep.
the winning side is easy to celebrate. It's what do you do when it's dark?
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of non-football information did you get from the coaches, the guys that coached were in the trenches with both Ken and Derek? Anything that jumps out at you?
The non-football.
Non-football. Because those are the guys that would have probably been the closest with, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, they spend the most time together, you know, over the year. I mean, because, you know, football is a year-round sport. I mean, from 7-on-7 camps to training and
So,
lifting. And
Coach McMahon, Jim McMahon,
Yeah.
has been defensive coordinator for Derek forever. And a guy named Marty Lomolino that was played for Derek at Gridley. They both told me stories about wanting to quit football. So Coach McMahon was a sophomore when Ken was
Yeah,
hired.
when
as
Ken was
Ken
hired, yeah.
Griffin, and he tells me about standing in the hallway in the back watching the first press conference. Ken comes in with curly hair that Ken swears wasn't permed, was natural. And the book has a picture of him in
Oh,
there
yeah.
with a purple suit and cowboy boots on. And Coach McMahon says, we didn't know if he was Liberace or John Wayne. He said, he took us to Camp Silka. We pretty quickly learned he was John Wayne.
Yeah.
And he said, the practice is really hard. He said, I threw up. I said, well, that's pretty common. He said, no, I threw up before practice because I knew what was coming. And
Yeah.
so in his case, he goes to him and says, you know, I don't think I want to play anymore.
Yeah.
I can't handle this. And Ken tells him, go home and think about it.
Yep.
He comes back the next day. His friends, his parents and stuff, he doesn't quit. And he said, I thank him every day.
Yeah.
Marty Lomolino was in summer workouts at Gridley. And he says he has him running in the gym. And Lomolino says, I can't do this anymore. He said it was 100 degrees. I'm hot. I'm not. He goes up to Ken and says, I'm quitting. Ken says, get your butt back in line and run. And Lomolino says, I thank him every day.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Jim McMahon, his day job is a firefighter in Springfield. His coaching job, and Ken worked with him around that
Yeah,
sure.
schedule. Marty Lomolino works for state government, but also was assistant football coach up in the Peoria area for years. And so those guys are like, he taught me not to quit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so there's stories like that.
Yeah.
And the story of Christian Gripper, you know, who, as I said, fumbled in
Sure.
a really crucial situation
yeah.
and turned his life into,
Yeah.
put it behind him. He says he's never forgotten it,
Yeah. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he overcame it.
It's good stuff. Good
Yeah,
stuff. for
sure is.
Yep.
Well, thanks for writing the book. I think there'll be a
Yeah.
lot of people who
Yes.
who love it and really enjoy it, and I suspect a lot of people who will learn things they had no idea about from the Leonard family.
Yeah, I got a note in the mail from Bart Geiser, one of Ken's quarterbacks. He lives
Yep.
in the Dallas area, and there's a little section about Bart in there. And he sent me a note, and he said, you know, I knew some of these things. Most of them I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he wrote me a very, very nice note. I mean, you're talking now about two football coaches and me. What we don't know how to do really well is to market it
Right.
and sell it. We're learning as we go, so we hope we can get it in the hands of people that
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure
not
you
help
will.
you do
just
that.
football fans,
Right.
people that and a woman from my Sunday school class Sunday stopped me and she said, I couldn't sleep the other night, so I started reading the book. I said, well, did it put you to sleep? And she was like,
No, I stayed up all night.
she said to me, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And I took
Which is a
that as
huge compliment.
I took it as a compliment that she thought it was a football book. It wasn't what I thought it was going to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Cool.
I hope that we can get it in the hands of people and that people can get something out of it in addition to entertainment.
Sure.
Yeah. Where, if folks would like to get a copy, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way right now, we have a website called victoriousleonardsplural.com.
Okay.
And you can order it directly off of the website. We have it currently in 3 or 4 places in Rochester, at Cocoa Blue, at Razzo's, at the Mockingbird Bakery in Rochester, and we're attempting to get it into some places in Springfield.
Yeah.
Well, good stuff. Thanks for the book, and thanks for giving us a little bit of your time today. We sure have enjoyed having you.
Thank you, Chris and Brad. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much,
thanks.
Mike. Good. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.